Hey guys, how's it going? I'm back here with another video, and in today's video we're going to be going over how to build one of my favorite beginner slash intermediate React project, so that whether you are just a beginner trying to build projects to put on your resume, or you are already a little bit more advanced and just wants to refine your skills, you'll be able to gain some value from this video. And the project we're going to be building is basically a Google Docs clone. I'm going to go over a little bit of a demo of exactly the project we're going to be creating, but basically it's going to allow us to type on a Google Doc with different formatting options and do this collaboratively, where every time we make changes to our doc and someone else is on a different computer looking at the same doc, they'll be able to see the changes changing in real time. And not only that, but also all the information will be saved in a database, so that if you're done writing on your doc, you'll be able to come back just like how it is with actual Google Docs. Now, before we get into actually doing the demo, if you want to check out the code, all the code will be in the description. So if you just want to do that, I don't blame you. You can just go ahead and do that as well. But if you want to stick around and understand how I built everything step by step, feel free to do so as well. So let's get into the demo. Okay, everyone. So let's get into our demo over here. This is basically the project that we're going to be building. I want to start off by saying I'm not going to focus a lot on UI. I know this is a Google Docs clone, but if you are familiar with my videos, you know that I personally leave UI stuff to whoever wants to build their own thing, because at the end of the day, I know that if you want to make any changes to the UI, you'll probably do so on your own, and I want to focus the main idea of the video on the functionality that we're going to be working on. But you can see it kind of looks like a Google Doc if you really think about it. So we have here two different browsers open, one in incognito and one on the normal one. So they have two different sessions opened, and they are on the same doc. So if I wanted to, I can actually type over here a bunch of stuff, and the other session will see the changes appearing on their doc as well. Obviously, there's a minor delay because they're listening to the changes, but most importantly, if I refresh both pages, for a second it doesn't show anything, but then it fetches the data. So all this data is being stored in an actual database. One thing that is cool is we have all of this functionality similar to Google Docs. I can change this to be like this. I can change it to normal, but let me select this as well. I can add links, for example, something like this, and it will actually act like a link. So it does look like Google Docs, and it has a bunch of the functionalities. Not to mention the fact that with the library we're going to be using for this video, you can add more functionalities to actually more accurately match Google Docs as well. So this is the basic demo of what we're going to be building. You can expand with this by, I don't know, creating, a login system. We're using authentication here, but we're using anonymous authentication. But you can improve this in many different ways, and I'll explain them in the end. But this is the basic demo of what we're going to be building. So let's get into the tutorial. Okay, everyone. So the first thing I want to do in order to start a project is, as you can see by the title, we're going to be using Firebase as our backend infrastructure. We're going to be using both the Firebase authentication and also the Firebase database, the Firestore database. I think it's easier to do it this way, especially if you're just building a project for the sense of learning and for the sense of making some sort of like resume application. I think this will make it a lot easier than using you making your own backend and making your own database. Although if you're interested in doing those as well, I have multiple tutorials on my channel as well. But basically with Firebase, you would go to firebase.google.com and you have to be logged in into a Google account. We would then go to our console, and this is where all of our Firebase projects would exist. Now I'm gonna click on create project, and we can put over here a name for this project that we're gonna be building. I'm gonna call it Docs Clone Tutorial because I already have a Docs clone when I was creating the demo for this video. And then I'm gonna click continue. Now it's gonna ask us if we wanna have Google Analytics. We're not gonna be deploying this, so I'm not gonna do that, and I don't care. So I'm gonna click create project, and it's going to start creating our project, which is pretty cool. While that's happening, I'm going to come to our code over here, and you can see that we have a folder opened in our VS Code. It's called Google Docs Clone Tutorial. Now, what I want to do is I want to just run the command npm create vite. Now, if you're not familiar with vite, it's basically create React app, but in my opinion, 1,000 times better. You can also build this with Next.js, whatever way you want to do it. I will personally use Vite, and I'll just press enter. Now it's going to ask us for our project name. Now I'm just going to put enter like a dot because I want to create it inside of the folder that we already are inside of. Then I'm pressing enter. It's going to ask us what is the framework we want to use. Obviously, we're going to be using React because it's my preferred framework. Then it's going to ask for JavaScript or TypeScript. I'm going to make it in TypeScript, although if you're not familiar with TypeScript, this isn't going to impact that much. I'll explain each step of the way whenever we do any TypeScript stuff, what you need to change, but I'm going to select TypeScript. Now it's going to generate a project, but we need to install the dependencies necessary. So I'm going to run npm install, and after this is done, we can just run npm run dev to actually run our project in our local host. So I'm going to press enter, and as you can see, it will say that it is running on this port. I'm going to copy it, and now all we have to do is, as you can see, our project is ready now, but I'll just open this up over here, and our code is running. But let's go back to our project over here on our Firebase, and let's click continue. You should see that our project has been created. Now, what do we want to do? First things first, it's going to ask us to connect this Firebase project with our project with a code, right? And there's multiple ways of doing this. Since we're working with a web project, we'll click on this and it will ask us to register our app. I'm going to call it Google Docs Clone. And I'm not going to set up hosting, but again, if you want to deploy this, you can do that as well. Then I'm going to click on register, and it's going to register our app. When this is done, it's going to give us the following prompt. We're supposed to install the Firebase module inside of our application, and we're going to do that by just running npm install Firebase. But also, we are supposed to initialize our Firebase application with this beautiful configuration file. And they do everything for us with including our API keys, our bucket, messages, IDs, all that kind of stuff. So I'll just copy this. Don't copy exactly what mine says over here because you need to copy the one that you have. All of this information will be different whenever you create your project. And by the way, if you are thinking, oh, I'll just connect to his project, I already deleted this. If you're watching, I already deleted this project. I'm not gonna just share my API key without actually deleting it first. But yeah, I'm gonna copy this and I'm gonna come to our source folder and I'm just gonna create a Firebase config.ts, or if you're using JavaScript, JS. Then inside of here, I'm just going to paste all of that code, right? And this will just initialize the connection between our project and the Firebase console. Now, we haven't defined in Firebase what we want to actually use, right? We haven't. They have a bunch of different things that we can use. And we mentioned in the beginning that we want to be working with authentication and with a database. So we need to go to both of them and initialize them. So let's go to authentication and click on get started. Now, there's multiple methods of authentication that you can work with Firebase. Like I said, if you want to make an email password type of sign-in, you can select this. If you want to sign in with Google, you can select this. I have a full massive Firebase tutorial if you want to check that out. I explain all of this kind of stuff. But in our case, we're going to sign up with anonymous. So just click that and then click enable anonymous sign-in and click on save. Perfect. Now we've set up our authentication. We want to set up our Firestore database. So I'll click on that and it will load. And when it's loaded, we just have to create our database. Now it's going to ask us for an ID. I'm just going to choose like whatever is right now. And it's going to ask us for a location. Now, if you're building a project that is going to be used, definitely select a location that makes sense for where your users are going to be in. They have a billion different locations, as you can see over here. I'm personally going to choose US West Los Angeles because I am really close to Los Angeles, even though I'm not in the US. And then I'm going to click next. And it's going to ask us if we want to start in production mode or in test mode. The most quickest explanation of what this is with the database in Firebase, you can add rules of who can actually access the database. So you can have the database interaction inside of your project, but if the user who's logged in and performing that operation doesn't satisfy the rule that you set up on your database, it won't allow them to do so, which is pretty cool. It allows a lot of autonomy for you whenever you're allowing or prohibiting people from accessing your database. Now, if you start in production mode, you'll have to set up the rules yourself. You see, it will say that it doesn't allow read or write because it just sets a false no matter what, and then you will have to come here and change it, right? But we're not going to be working or worrying about this, so we'll start in test mode. What test mode does is for 30 days, it will allow read and write no matter what, as you can see over here. And if you want to then change it and put it in production mode, you'll have to then go and create your rule. So I'll click on create over here, and it will create our Firestore database. And as you can see, we have successfully created it. Now, we're not going to be doing anything anymore over here. It will all will be generated through our code. So let's start focusing on our actual project. So right now we just have our boilerplate code with the configuration file for Firebase. So what do we want to do next? Well, we want to install all of the necessary dependencies we're going to be working with on this project. Obviously, we already installed Firebase, but we need a couple more. So first of all, we need to install the library that is going to facilitate us creating this beautiful Google Doc. So there's a library that does a lot of the work for us. It's called Quill. It has a version for React called React Quill. So what I want to do is I want to install both Quill and React Quill. So I'm going to do npm I Quill and React Quill. Perfect. Now, the next library I want to install is Lodash. Now, Lodash, if you know it, it basically is a very popular library that allows you to access some common tool functions that will improve your project with like performance, with just maintaining your project organized. It has a bunch of functionalities, and specifically, we just want to use one of its functions that I used to use a lot, and I realized that it could help a lot with us here. Which is going to be to prevent throttling our database requests. You'll understand later on, but this will be a good catch for us. So I'm just going to press enter over here, and it will install all of the necessary packages. Now, what do we do? Well, let's just finish up the configuration for Firebase before we actually start writing our component. What do I mean by that? Well, we already have set up our app, right? But remember, we are using two parts of Firebase that we haven't actually initialized here. One of them is authentication, and the other one is the Firestore database. So what I want to do is I want to create an instance of both of those parts of Firebase. One will be auth. So we'll just use the get auth function that will be imported from Firebase. And we just pass in the app over here. Now we'll do the same thing with the database, call it db, and set it equal to get Firestore. So we initialize that as well. Now we want to access both of them elsewhere in our project, specifically in our components. So I will export both of these constants. Perfect. Now we're basically done with our configuration. So let's close this right here and go into our app.tsx. Now, because we used Vite, this is all already set up, but we're going to delete everything inside of here so that we can start from a clean component, right? So I'm going to build the minimal structure of our app over here, which will consist of a div with a class name of app. And inside of here, I just want to add a little header section with an h1 tag that says Google Docs clone. Now, like I said, we're not going to be focusing on CSS and UI stuff, but I did write the CSS and UI. More importantly, I believe I used either a pre-made CSS file for this, or I used ChatGPT for generating the CSS. So I wouldn't worry that much about copying my CSS unless you really like it. But I'm going to set up the project in a way that will, at the end, allow me to just paste my CSS and make everything look exactly like the demo you saw in the beginning. But yeah, basically, this is the starter of our project. We're going to delete this over here and all of this stuff. And in our app component, we want to actually automatically sign in a user that goes inside of our app anonymously. So we're going to import over here at the top the auth variable that we just created from Firebase. So I'll just actually Firebase config, and we're going to import the auth variable. Now we want to import two functions from Firebase auth. So I'll say import from Firebase /auth, and I want to import one called sign in anonymously. Like I said, we're going to be signing in anonymously. And I also want to copy the function on auth state changed. Now inside of this, we're going to be running a use effect, which will basically run a function immediately when our page first renders. So I'm going to be, wait, let me just create it again. I'm going to be passing an empty dependency list because we only want it to run once. And inside of here, I want to automatically sign in this user anonymously and pass in the auth variable we created. Now this is going to generate a user ID. It's going to obviously not have a name because the user was anonymous, but it's going to create a session for this user. And we can actually detect that they actually logged in by using the onAuth state changed function, passing in our auth, and then in our callback function over here, we'll have information about the user. More specifically, to check to see if the user is actually signing in, I want to check to see that if the user signed in, I want to just console log a message, probably saying something like user signed in, and I'll pass in the user.uid, which is the ID of the user. Now we can check to see if this is working. We have our project over here. Let's open our console log, and yeah, automatically you see we get the message with the ID, right? And it keeps persisting per session. It's the same ID. So we successfully connected our Firebase. We know it's working now, and we also successfully signed in a user. Now comes the fun part, which is actually building the editor component that is going to have all of the ReactQL logic and all of the logic related to the database. So this project is so simple that is insane. We're just going to have one folder over here called components, but technically there's only going to be one component inside of here called the text editor.tsx. So inside of here, we want to export a const called text editor and just export this component, which for now we'll just return it like this. And then over here at the top, or actually down here, we'll just pass in the text editor component and automatically import it over here. So don't get me wrong, we only have one component, but this component is going to be packed. Most importantly, the return function over here will only return a very small amount of things. First of all, let's return a div with the class name of Google Docs Editor. Again, this class name will be handled in our CSS at the end of the video. But then over here, we'll just pass in our ReactQL component. So what I want to do in the top over here is import ReactQL from ReactQL, and down here, just pass in the ReactQL component. Now, this component is going to take in one single piece of props. If you come over here, we should already see some UI, which doesn't really mean anything and it's all ugly, but we're going to manage it properly inside of here. The one prop that I want to pass in is the ref. And if you're not familiar with refs in React, I won't go too much in depth because this is not a use ref hook tutorial video, but it will allow us to make a non-reference to this specific component so that we can manage a lot of its properties. And the way we're gonna keep track of it is by using the use ref hook and creating a quil ref variable over here. So use ref, and I'm gonna set it to null. Since I'm using TypeScript, I will define the type, but the thing is, since this is a ref, most likely you should just put any for now. And we're just going to pass this quil ref inside of here. So now we get to the harder part of this tutorial, which is we're going to create all of the logic for not only handling whenever a user types in our Google Doc locally, but also saving that information to our database, then listening to also any changes in the database and updating the changes locally, and also loading the data from the database to our local Google Doc initially when go into the website. So there's exactly 3 different parts that we need to handle, and all of them are equally as complicated. But I'll try to make it as simple as I can for you guys. And we're going to do all of them inside of this use effect hook over here. So let's create a use effect, and it's going to be again with a empty dependency list. And inside of here, like I said, we're going to be working with the ref. So I want to first check to see if coolref.current is true. Then we'll work with whatever we have to inside of this check. Perfect. I want to divide our code initially over here with some comments so that we properly divide our code and it becomes a lot more readable. So the first thing I want to do inside of this is I want to just load any initial content from our Firestore DB. So here we're going to put some code that is going to fetch the data from our Google Doc that is in our Firebase database, and it's just going to load it into our actual ReactQuill Google Doc. Then somewhere down here, we're going to have to listen to Firestore for any updates and update locally in real time. So this is where we're going to have to be listening for any changes in our database. And whenever we listen to it, basically whenever another user types on or changes something in our Google Doc in a different Google Doc, we'll have to listen for it and possibly change it inside of our code. Finally, we'll have to listen for local text changes and just save it to Firestore perfectly. Now, these are the three things that we want to do. Now, which one will we start with? Well, I think it makes sense to start with the last one, the listen for local changes and save it to our Firestore, because then we can have some data in our Firestore to actually test out if we are correctly loading the data or if we're correctly listening to the data, right? It makes a lot of sense. So this part over here also, in my opinion, is the easiest one, which is we're just going to listen for any changes in the input that we have in this quill and make some database mutations based on that. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, first things first, I'm going to create a reference to our actual editor. Now, the editor is a part of the ReactQuill library, which allows us to detect a lot of the user events on the input of the Google Doc. So to get this information, we'll use the quill ref that we have. Oh, I just realized I used 2 Fs. I severely apologize for this. So let me just change all of this. Make it have only 1 F. Perfect. Okay. Wait, what is this? Okay. So we'll get the quill ref. We'll access the current value of it, and then access the get editor function that we know exists based on the docs from the ReactQuill library, but this will give us access to the editor. Now, with the editor, we can listen and subscribe to some events. So the first event that I want to subscribe to is the text change event. And this event will, like the name explains, listen for any change in the Google Docs text, which is exactly what we want. So I'm going to have a callback function over here, which whenever there's any changes in the text, we want to do some stuff. The first thing I want to do is basically tell React that we are typing. Now, why do we want to do that? Well, because if we are typing something and someone else is typing something as well, the states between those two people and the state of our doc can get very confusing. I'm going to be honest with you. This collaboration between 2 users in Google in our project is not going to be perfect. The Google Docs algorithm is probably insane, and and I've played around with my project. I think I got it into a good state where it isn't that buggy and could actually be used. But there are a lot of edge cases that you need to think about, especially when you have 2 people editing the same thing with delays in their connection. It becomes really complicated. So we need to account for a lot of the states that a user can get stuck. And one of the things that we need to keep in mind is the fact that a user can be editing the text, and we need to know when this is the case. So I want to create over here on the top a state that is going to keep track of if the current local user is actually editing their thing. So we'll start it off as false, and this is going to be a Boolean state, and let's call it is editing, and create a function called set is editing. Perfect. Now, inside of this callback function, the first thing I want to do is I want to set is editing to true, because if the text is changing, it means that the local user is actually editing. Then I want to call a function called save content. And this is where we're going to write the logic for saving our data into our database, right? Now, at the end of this, I also want to set a timeout that will run after 5 seconds to detect whenever the user stops editing. So we want to reset the editing state after 5 seconds of inactivity. So we'll set is editing to false as long as 5 seconds has passed. And the reason why I want to do this is so that we, again, keep track of everything. Now, this number can change. I believe 5 seconds makes sense because sometimes you just wait a bit to like type the next word, and then you wait 5 seconds. I think 5 seconds makes a lot of sense in this case, but obviously this is very variable and relative. So save content, what are we going to do with this function? Well, let's get out of this use effect and actually create the function. So const save content is going to be a function that is going to handle everything, right? So what do we want to handle? Well, first of all, I want to ask, okay, is quill ref current true? And if this is the case, then I want to grab the content of our Google Doc. So I'm going to create a variable called content, set it equal to quill ref current, and similar to the get editor function, there is a get contents function that we can get from the get editor. So I'm going to say get editor dot get contents, and this will give us back the content in our Google Doc so that we can actually save it. I'm going to add some debugging console logs. So I'm going to console log saving content to DB, and we're just going to pass in the content over here so that we can debug if anything happens. Now, what we want to do is actually store whatever value we have over here into our database. Now, how do we do that? With Firebase and Firestore is really easy. We're just going to import a couple things from Firebase. Wait, I can't properly write. Sorry about that. Firebase, import / Firestore. And I want to import the set doc function. Now, this function will allow us to set value to a specific document, so add stuff into our database. Now, a document would need to be created in order for us to actually do that. So we also have to reference which document in our Firestore database we want to access. So you can see over here, we can create a collection, right? And a collection will allow documents. So we need to specify where our documents are going to exist inside of our project. So to do that, we have to also call in the doc function from Firestore and create a reference to which document we want. So I'll create the document ref over here, set it equal to the doc function, and pass in the DB variable that we have from, I just realized we didn't import it here. So import from /, or go back twice, and Firebase config, and we'll import the DB. Perfect. We'll pass in the DB, and then we'll put a name for this. It might get confusing because we're using Google Docs and the word documents, and it's just how Firebase also calls it. But the table will be called documents, or the collection, and the name of the document we want to create, let's call it sample doc, something like that. And we're making a reference to it so that when we call the setDoc function, we know where to put our data. So let's do that. We'll come over here, we'll call setDoc, and the setDoc function requires the document ref. And more specifically, it requires the object that we're going to put inside of it. I want to make the object look like this. It's going to be an object with a content field where it's going to actually store all the content from this variable. Now, to get the content from this variable, we actually just grab the ops property that exists inside of it. And we then also want to merge in case we have conflicting values. So I'll put merge true. And should I do this async await? I'll just do a dot then probably. But yeah, I'll do a dot then. If this is successful, let's just console log something like doc or content saved perfectly. And then if there's any errors, let's catch that error. And actually inside of here, I can just do console.error, which is pretty cool. Okay, so now we have this information and we're able to actually do some stuff to it. I'm going to add the CSS right now, actually, because I realized that everything there looks really weird. So let me just delete all of this and grab the CSS and paste it. Okay, everyone, I just pasted the CSS and you can see that a lot of things changed. Again, the CSS will be all in the description if you want to check it out. But our website now should look something like this, right? I'll also probably change the index.css over here. I believe I actually just deleted it. Yeah, this makes a lot more sense. But yeah, this is our project right now. Now let's test to see if it works. Okay, let's test it. I'm going to open up our inspect element over here and refresh the page. Let's see. I'll just clear this out so we can have a clear view. And let's start typing on some stuff over here. So let's type words. You see we're getting a bunch of console logs saying that the content was successfully saved. And it gives us an object with the correct information. Now, if we refresh this page, the data won't have saved because we haven't implemented the logic for loading the data from Firestore. But we can check to see if it worked over here. If we refresh this and it has a documents collection with a sample doc entry with our data, it means we successfully saved. And guess what? That's exactly what happened. And we have here the data that we had before, even though it's not showing up. So we already know kind of what we want to do next. But before we actually load that, there are a couple of things that we need to take into account. Remember I was talking about handling edge cases, like knowing if the user is editing or not? Well, there's one thing I want to do, which is tracking if a change that we had in our database is a local change or not. Because again, we want to handle conflicts between our change and another person's change. So the way we're going to do that is by creating a reference called isLocalChange, and it's going to be useRef, which is going to be actually a Boolean, so it's going to be false. And this over here will allow us to decide how we're going to handle our data. So first things first, I want to change this to check to see if isLocalChange.current is not null. And if it isn't, then when we make our local change, which we know happens inside of this function, I want to set over here the set, or actually isLocalChange to be equal, the current to be equal to false. Now, why we're setting it to false, you might be asking, oh, aren't you having a local change here? Well, this after this is done. So this is after the local change has been saved. So we want to reset the flag after saving it. Now, if we're setting it to false, where do we set it to true? Well, down here, we have to set it to true whenever the text is changing. So before the isEditing is true, we'll just isLocalChange.current is equal to true. So we're marking it as a local change because it happened when our actual thing, our actual text has changed. Perfect. Now we have a lot of our initial logic done. But one thing you should keep in mind is, how does this actually know that it is us who's making the change? Think about it. When we load changes from our database that another user made, it will write, we will theoretically write onto this input the changes, so it's updating, right? So when that happens, this will also be triggered, correct? So it will also assume it's local because this is how we wrote the code. So there's something really cool that we can do with this. On this text change, we can get some information related to who made the change. So what I want to do is access that. There's a variable over, or an argument called source, which is the third value over here. It's called source, and we want to use it to check to see if source is equal to user. Then we actually want to make all of these changes, because if it's not equal to user, then it's not the actual user who is making this text change. It is actually the data that we are grabbing from the database. So you see we got a bunch of errors here, but this is all just because we haven't defined types. And to be honest, we'll just put any to each of them. And yeah, it's a bit annoying because we are using TypeScript for a tutorial, which doesn't really need TypeScript. I'll make it, I'll actually change this to false from strict, and this error should disappear. Oh yeah, it's duplicate, so we should probably just remove this. Actually, I won't use underscore. The reason why I put underscore is because we're not going to be using these variables, but we need to define them like this to access the source. So I'll just put the name of what they are. You don't need to know them. They're not useful for this tutorial. What we actually wanted was the source, and we got it. So we perfectly handled a lot of our issues. Now, what do? Well, we're done with this part. I think it's time to handle loading the initial content from the database. This part is also pretty simple. We're going to be using the getDoc function from Firestore. It's going to automatically import it, as you can see. I should probably put it over here. But basically, this function, like the name suggests, allows us to get documents. And we'll pass in the document ref over here and use a dot then after to handle the case in which we successfully get the document. Now, this is going to return what we're going to call a doc snapshot, so a doc snap. And inside of here, we want to know if there is actually a document, because if there isn't, we'll handle the case elsewhere. But if it exists, then we want to get the content from it and create a variable called save content, set it equal to docsnap.data to access the data .content, because that's how we defined our document, right? If you go to our database over here, we have a content field, and that's what we're trying to access over here. Now, with this saved content, we want to check, is it actually not nil? So did we get the saved content? And if so, we want to now update our quill ref. So quillref.current, we want to get the editor and use the set contents function. Remember we used the get contents. Now we're going to use the set contents function to pass in the saved content and update our Google Doc. So if initially it doesn't have anything, but the database shows that it does, it will get that document and save it inside of our Google Doc. Perfect. Now, if the document doesn't exist, right? If it on the outside of this, we'll just handle this edge case. Now, in this case, it will just probably console log a message saying no doc found, starting with an empty editor, something like that. Perfect. Let's save. And we also, this is a promise, right? If there's any issues network-wise, we also want to catch it and just console log or console.error, whatever value we get from here. Perfect. If we go to our thing over here, it should already load it. Let's see. It didn't. Let's see our console log and see what's up. So let's check this out. We're not really getting any information. Did we handle this properly? Seems like it. I don't know why it's not loading. Let me check this. Oh yeah, found the error. This should be saved content. So when we save this, we should now see that this loads whatever we type over here. If we want to make changes, we can just type them, as you can see. And when we refresh it now, it will save that information and load it perfectly for us. Now, one of the things that is kind of annoying for me is, and you guys might have noticed already, we did put some CSS, but the quill things like the editor tools over here at the top, and just the look of it doesn't really look exactly how I showed in the beginning. And the reason for that is because Quill does have a CSS file that we can import over here, and I just forgot to do that, but we'll just import the React Quill slash, I think it's the dist Quill, and you can see that they have some options over here. We're going to choose the Snow version, and we're also going to import, I just realized we didn't import the app.css over here. Perfect. And let's check how it looks. It already looks a little bit better, as you can see. It looks a lot better, actually. But there's a lot of things we can still do. Technically, I use it mostly like this, so it looks better. But you can actually make this toolbar be smaller. And we'll do that in the end of the video. But now that it looks a little bit more like an actual website, let's write the final part of this project, which is the part where we listen to local changes. Because if I were to open, for example, let me actually open here, Google Chrome incognito, localhost. Let me have both of them right next to each other. My computer's kind of slow, sorry about that. Let's have them right next to each other. Perfect. If I were to type on this is not seeing the change in real time. Although if this one refreshes it, it will see the changes, but it's not seeing it in real time. Now, how are we going to do that is in the Firestore database, you can actually listen to changes. Similar to how we're listening to any changes on our editor, we can listen to changes in our database. How do we do that? Well, we use the onSnapshot function from Firestore. Now, I just imported it automatically when I pressed enter, but you have to do that. And this function will return back a variable called unsubscribe. Now, because we're subscribing to listening to this event, similar to how we subscribed to the event here with the editor, we'll have to then clean this up so that we don't actually cause any memory leaks. You guys will see in a second. But we are listening over here on Snapshot, and we have to pass in the document ref so that we know which document we're listening to. And whenever there's any changes to it, we'll have access to the snapshot. Now, inside of here, we're going to check, similar to what we did above, if the snapshot exists. So if there is one, we're going to make some changes. If there's not, we'll not even handle it at this point because it doesn't really matter. Now, if there's any new content, we're going to have to keep track of it. So we'll say snapshot.data.content. Now, if the user is not editing, so if the user is not currently typing, then we want to implement those changes by saying const editor is equal to quill ref dot current dot get editor, and then we're going to say const current cursor position. Now, the reason why I'm doing this is because I noticed when I was playing around with this that a lot of times when the data would update, the cursor position would literally go to the beginning and would keep playing around, like jumping around from one place to the other. It was super annoying, almost made me give up with this project, but we're trying to polish it and make it look realistic. So I had to find a solution, and I realized that React Quill has some sort of solution for it. So we're keeping track of where our cursor position is while we're typing, and when we get a new change, it won't affect it. So current cursor position, we'll say editor dot get selection, and we'll say dot index to get it. If it's empty, we'll just set it to 0, so we'll actually get it to the start if it's null. Then we have two things we want to do. The first one is we want to set the contents of our editor, so of our doc, to be equal to the new content, and we need to use the silent mode to avoid triggering this text change. So this is a really cool thing that React Quill has, and it really helps us in this case. Then we want to use the editor.set selection over here to the current cursor position so that we don't jump around with our cursors. And you know what's cool about this? Well, this is pretty much done. The only thing we need to do left is optimization to our code because like I said, we don't want to cause any memory leaks. So one of the things I want to do is below this, we're going to return inside of our use effect. We're going to return, first of all, we're going to unsubscribe to the snapshot. And we're also going to turn this editor dot off. So we're going to turn off the listener to the text change event. Perfect. Now we are pretty much done. We should see that if I come over here and I have both of these, right? And I make any change, like deleting it, the other one will see it as well. If I type it, you'll see that the other one will get it. I can just keep doing this, and I can do it from this one as well. Not to mention that the changes in this are all, like the tools also work, right? I can do this. I don't know about whatever you want to do in your Google Docs, but it looks pretty cool. I really like this kind of approach because it's very useful and it also looks way more complicated than it actually is. Now, there's one final thing I want to do, which is why we installed Lodash. If you recall, we installed the Lodash library in the beginning of this tutorial. And the reason why we did that is because when we type all of this, like every character we're typing, we can type a lot of things. We're making a database call all the time to save it, right? So we want to prevent it, especially for typing really quickly, from throttling our service. So what I want to do is use this function from Lodash. So import from Lodash, and they have a really cool function called throttle. And this function basically makes it such that when we apply it to a function, like we're going to do over here to the save content function, when we apply it, it will basically only run this function once every, and then we set up a wait time in milliseconds over here. So I only want to call this function once every second. I don't want to call it multiple times during 1 second because it's unnecessary. If I'm typing a whole word over here, right? If I'm typing Pedro, right? Instead of calling it 5 times, I can just wait 1 second and just save it once with the word Pedro, right? It's kind of like debouncing. We're just preventing unnecessary calls to the database, and it will help the performance of our project by a lot. So this is basically it. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like down below and comment what you want to see next. Subscribe because I'm posting twice a week, no exceptions. And I would massively appreciate if I can get some support on this comeback that I'm making to YouTube. Really appreciate it. I am really enjoying it. And this kind of project is the kind of project that I think can be really helpful, especially if you're a beginner trying to make it in this ever so complicated industry. So that's basically it. If you want to check out the code, it will be in the description. Thank you for watching, and I see you guys next time.